A single candle flickers in a room heavy with velvet and secrets. The air tastes of wax, old perfume, and damp stone. You hear a whisper echo down the corridor, then the soft drag of silk across marble. Someone is moving where no one should be. Behind a gilded door lies a cradle draped in mourning black. Beside it, a locked box of letters bound with iron clasps. The portraits on the walls seem to watch you, their eyes glinting with unsaid accusations. You reach out, fingertips brushing the cold brass handle, and the scent of burning tallow and salt water rises like a warning. In this palace, truths were embalmed like corpses, hidden under crowns and prayers. Tonight, for the first time, the locks tremble. What was promised as honor and piety is about to reveal a legacy of silence, control, and blood. The palace rises before you like a golden mirage, its high windows throwing shards of morning light across gravel courtyards, swept clean by invisible hands. At first glance, everything speaks of order and permanence. Horse-drawn carriages creaking over cobblestones, liveried footmen stiff as chess pieces, the scent of lavender drifting from polished banisters. But step closer, and you feel the other atmosphere. A hush beneath the bustle, a weight in the air as though the stone itself has learned to listen. Inside, corridors narrow into an endless maze of panelled rooms, where portraits stare down with frozen smiles, and women glide past in dresses heavy enough to bruise their shoulders. Their jewels catch the light, but their eyes do not. A queen may appear to drift like a swan across parquet floors, yet her every movement is timed, measured, observed. She knows the rules by heart. When to curtsy, when to kneel, when to smile through pain. Because the price of a single misstep can be exile, disgrace, or worse. Even the softest gestures are rehearsed. Fingers resting on a prayer book, lips murmuring a blessing, while inside she counts the hours of her own captivity. This is the world the British monarchy sold to its subjects as divine order. A spectacle of silk and devotion. In truth, it is a lattice of invisible chains, binding bloodlines and bodies alike. The young bride who steps across the threshold believes she is ascending into power. The door closes behind her with the quiet click of a lock she will never see. The deeper you move into the palace, the more the air thickens with rules no one speaks aloud. Every hallway carries a different scent. Wax, incense, damp wool from the guards at the doors. But the underlying odor is always the same, fear sweetened by perfume. Ladies in waiting whisper behind gloved hands, not out of malice, but survival. A misplaced word can travel faster than a carriage and do more damage than a blade. At dawn, prayers echo through the private chapel, where marble angels lean from the ceiling as though listening for confessions never given. Here, a queen kneels on cushions embroidered with gold thread that pricks her skin like hidden thorns. She bows not only to God but to the dynasty, to the endless line of men whose signatures have already decided her fate. Outside these walls, the public sees carriages, coronations, and portrait sittings. Inside, the reality is rehearsed obedience. Servants polish silver knowing it reflects the faces of people who are not free. The young bride whose name will appear in history books stands at a window barred not with iron but with duty, watching swans on the lake, while her own reflection floats back at her like a stranger's. Her letters home are censored, her footsteps shadowed by attendants chosen by others. Even her laughter, when it comes, sounds like someone else's voice echoing from far away. This is the opening act of her royal life, a glittering stage whose wings hide ropes, pulleys, and traps. Night falls slowly over the palace, and with it comes the true shape of its silence. In the great gallery, candles burn low, their flames bending under invisible draughts from hidden doors. The scent of beeswax mingles with the faint musk of velvet drapes, heavy and unmoving as burial cloths. Somewhere beyond these walls, the city hums with tavern laughter and the rattle of carriage wheels. But here, the world contracts to a whisper. The young queen sits before a mirror framed in gilt, the glass clouded slightly from age, and studies her own reflection as if it belongs to someone else. Her gown, once imagined as a symbol of triumph, weighs on her collarbones like a chain. Each jewel at her throat is a bead of obligation. Behind her, two attendants stand like shadows, speaking only when spoken to, recording each detail of her routine for men she will never see. Letters arrive sealed in red wax, carrying instructions disguised as invitations. Even her sleep is not her own. Guards outside her door, rules about when candles must be snuffed, how many breaths of incense are permitted before midnight. Somewhere within her chest, the first tremor of realization begins. That this is not a passage into freedom or power, but into a life where every word, gesture, and heartbeat is measured and archived. The palace that sparkled like a promise now closes around her like a gilded birdcage, its bars unseen but absolute. In the distance, a clock strikes, and she lifts her eyes from the mirror to the shadows that seem to lean closer, as though the walls themselves are listening to her thoughts. Morning in the palace begins not with freedom, but with ritual. Bells toll from the chapel tower, their echo carrying through frost-glazed courtyards like a summons. You follow the Queen's footsteps across cold marble floors. Each heel click swallowed by the thick hush of tapestries that smell faintly of incense and age. In public, she appears wrapped in shimmering silks embroidered with lilies and crosses, but beneath the fabric, her wrists bear the faint marks of tightly fastened jewels and 2 long vigils on kneeling cushions. Each garment is a message, purity stitched into the hem, obedience hidden in the seams. She enters the chapel, where candlelight pools on black and white tiles like spilled wax. Rows of ladies in waiting kneel behind her, their eyes lowered, lips moving with prayers they barely remember. This is where spiritual devotion and political theatre merge. Vows of faith double as chains of silence. The air tastes of beeswax and iron, as though the sacred and the carceral have mingled. A confessor stands ready, but the Queen knows which sins she may speak, and which she must carry wordless in her heart. Longings, resentments, small rebellions already whispered by the walls. To the public, she is the embodiment of virtue. To herself, she is a woman memorizing the steps of a dance she never chose. As she rises, the sound of her silks brushing the stone is almost like wings, yet each movement is an echo of someone else's command. This is how control cloaks itself in prayer, and how faith becomes another leash fastened invisibly at the throat. Later that day, the Queen is led into a chamber lined with dark oak panels, where sunlight barely filters through stained glass, turning the air into shards of ruby and emerald. Here her wardrobe is chosen not for beauty but for strategy. Fabrics arrive from distant colonies, heavy brocades, stiff satins, veils woven so fine they whisper when unfolded. And each piece is selected to send a signal to court factions she is forbidden to address directly. She stands as women pin and lace and tighten, their fingers quick and silent, their own faces expressionless. A necklace of pearls is clasped at her throat. Its cool touch is a reminder that even adornment can become a shackle. When she sits at the embroidery frame with the other ladies, the work is meant to be devotional, tiny crosses and lilies stitched in gold thread. But the room smells of sweat and candle smoke, not sanctity. Conversation is limited to safe topics: the weather, a new hymn, a cousin's health. Anything more daring can be overheard by the wrong ears, carried through corridors by servants whose loyalty is bought by others. This is how power works here, through symbols instead of chains, silence instead of whips. Outside, carriages clatter across the courtyard, carrying diplomats and bishops, who will speak for her, about her, without ever speaking to her. From the window she watches them go, a figure trapped in brocade, her hand resting on a prayer book whose leather is warm from the sun, but cold in meaning. It is in these quiet hours that she begins to understand how religion and etiquette are not just customs, but weapons, polished and deployed with the same precision as a blade. Night turns the chapel's gilded ceiling into a starless sky, and the palace exhales its last murmurs as servants retreat like shadows down hidden stairways. In her private oratory, the Queen kneels alone, candlelight bending over her bowed head, the scent of wax and rosewater heavy in the stillness. The velvet cushion beneath her knees feels damp from hours of prayer. Her hands, clasped so tightly, ache as though holding chains. In the official record, she is pious, an example to the realm. In truth, she is bargaining silently with heaven, whispering the words she cannot utter aloud. Despair, longing, the memory of a name she is forbidden to speak. The walls are lined with icons whose painted eyes seem to follow her, not in blessing, but in surveillance. Beyond the door, 2 guards wait, their boots scuffing the marble at intervals like a metronome of vigilance. Even solitude is observed. She presses her forehead to the edge of the wooden prie-dieu, feeling splinters where varnish has worn thin, and imagines for a moment that she could run barefoot down the corridors, tear off the silks, vanish into the city where no one knows her name. But the fantasy dissolves before the iron weight of reality. Contracts signed in bloodlines, alliances sealed by vows, her very body a chess piece moved by invisible hands. Rising at last, she snuffs the candle with a breath, watching smoke curl upward like an untethered soul. The room grows dark, but its darkness feels alive, as if the palace itself is inhaling her secrets to keep them for another century. When she opens the door, the guards straighten, and she walks past them with the practiced serenity of a woman who has learned that submission, performed flawlessly, is the only armor allowed to her. Dawn breaks pale and brittle, a thin light seeping through the palace shutters, as if it too must sneak past the guards. In a room meant for needlework, 3 women sit close together, their fingers busy with embroidery, but their whispers carrying a different thread. Names, warnings, fragments of forbidden news. The Queen's eyes remain on her stitching, yet she listens to every breath. This is the hidden world behind the curtain, where loyalty is bartered in glances and coded gestures, where a single misplaced word can unravel years of careful survival. On the surface, she is still the model consort, draped in soft blues and pearls. But under her bodice, a small folded scrap of paper presses against her skin. A poem, a plan, a lifeline written in another's hand. The air smells of wool, ink, and candle soot. The muffled clatter of a tray outside signals the approach of a servant, whose footsteps always linger a beat too long at her door. Somewhere down the hall, a door closes sharply. A warning. The Queen does not look up, but her pulse quickens. The palace has taught her that rebellion is rarely a trumpet blast. More often, it is a series of small breaths, hidden notes, quiet signals. She shifts the needle in her hand, pricking her finger, and a bead of blood wells up. A tiny, defiant mark that she hides beneath the silk. Outside, the bells call for prayers. But inside this room, a different liturgy is taking shape, one stitched from secrecy and resolve. Afternoon light slants through high windows, dust motes swirling like tiny messengers above the parquet floor. The Queen has been summoned to a music lesson, a harmless pastime to the court, but today the instrument is only a prop. A trusted lady-in-waiting closes the door softly and begins to pluck a lute while her eyes flick towards the fireplace. In the hollow of its carved mantle, a folded note waits. The Queen glides across the rug as if admiring the tapestry, her heart drumming against her ribs. She reaches into the crevice and retrieves the scrap, sliding it beneath her sleeve before anyone can notice. Outside the chamber, guards pace in predictable patterns. She has memorized each interval. The note carries only a few lines. The name of a sympathetic clergyman, a time, a hidden passageway. It smells faintly of smoke and lavender, the scent of its sender. She sits beside the instrument, her fingers ghosting over the strings, producing a low hum that hides the tremor in her breath. This is rebellion in miniature. A glance, a note, a rehearsed smile. If discovered, it would mean ruin or death. But in the palace of whispers, hope must also be whispered. As the lady-in-waiting plucks a final chord, their eyes meet for half a heartbeat. A tiny pact sealed in silence. The Queen rises, smoothing her gown, and returns to the corridor, her expression composed, her pulse a storm. Every step she takes now carries two weights, the visible weight of etiquette and the hidden weight of defiance pressing like a secret jewel against her wrist. Night draws its heavy curtains over the palace, but in the warren of back staircases and storage rooms, a faint lamp flickers. The Queen moves through the passage she once believed was for servants alone, her slippers brushing stone worn smooth by centuries of hidden footsteps. The air smells of damp mortar and old wine from forgotten cellars. Every sound is magnified, a drop of water echoing like a drum, the soft rasp of her sleeve against the wall, her own heartbeat thrumming in her ears. In her palm, she carries a tiny silver key, pressed into her hand during a brief encounter in the chapel's shadowed vestibule. Beyond the door it opens, waits a small chamber with a single table and 3 candles burning low. Here she meets not courtiers, but people without titles. A maid whose brother was imprisoned for dissent, a tutor dismissed for a dangerous pamphlet, a groom who once smuggled letters out in saddlebags. They speak quietly, their words braided with caution. Yet within their voices is the first trace of oxygen she has felt in months. They do not plan treason in the grand sense. They plan truth, leaks, small cracks in the marble of the dynasty. She listens, her hands folded as if still in prayer. But inside her a different litany begins. One of names, roots, signals. Above them, the palace sleeps, unaware that beneath its floors a quiet revolution pulses like a heartbeat in the dark. When at last she extinguishes the candles, the smoke curls upward, thin and determined, vanishing into the cracks like a message sent to the night. Morning creeps into the palace not with trumpets, but with a muted grey light that makes every gilt frame look tarnished. The Queen walks the long portrait hall alone, her slippers barely whispering over the black and white tiles. Faces of dead monarchs line the walls, their eyes fixed forward, but in this light, they seem to follow her like silent jurors. Dust hangs in the air, smelling faintly of wax and old velvet. This is where scandals are buried, beneath coats of paint, in sealed archives, inside smiles posed for eternity. Today, though, something feels altered. A rumour has escaped the palace gates, a whisper of letters, meetings, defiance. She runs her fingers along the edge of a frame, feeling the carved oak splinter under her touch, and wonders if she too will become only a name in the margin, a muted face staring down at strangers. Outside, carriages rattle toward Parliament, carrying men who will debate her reputation without ever speaking her name aloud. Inside, the gallery seems to breathe around her, each portrait a mirror of what happens to women who step outside the script. Some erased, some sanctified, all silenced. Yet in her chest a steadier rhythm beats. Not triumph, not fear, but something like resolve. The hall smells of smoke from last night's dying fires and the faint perfume of a future not yet written. Stone corridors with sealed packets whose red wax glistens like fresh wounds. Rumours of the Queen's secret meetings now move faster than the carriages outside. In the kitchens, maids pause mid-task to exchange glances, while in the guardrooms, boots clatter in restless patterns. She stands at a high window, watching smoke rise from the chimneys of London, its grey fingers blending into the low sky. Below her, a courtyard fills with onlookers, officials, clergy, courtiers, all arriving for an emergency council convened not in her name, but because of her. The air tastes of iron and soot, and every toll of the chapel bell feels like a verdict drawing closer. Yet her back is straight, her gown plain, her hair unadorned. She has learned to wear serenity as armour. In the portrait hall, she pauses before a canvas of a long-dead queen, rumoured to have vanished after defying a king. The paint has darkened with age, but the eyes still blaze faintly, a secret fire trapped under varnish. For a heartbeat, she feels those eyes meeting hers across time, and a pulse of courage flickers through her chest. Outside the door, voices rise, men debating consequences, punishments, erasure. Inside, she inhales the scent of dust and candle smoke, and knows that whatever is decided, her story has already escaped these walls in murmurs and fragments, carried by hands braver than hers. Evening settles over the palace like a velvet shroud, muffling footsteps and softening the edges of the portraits until they seem to dissolve into shadows. The council has ended. Verdicts and bargains have been struck in rooms she was never allowed to enter. Yet a strange quiet triumph hums beneath her skin as she walks once more through the gallery. Candles burn low in iron sconces, their light sliding across cracked varnish, making the painted faces flicker as though alive. She can almost hear a low chorus of whispers rising from the walls. Not condemnation, but recognition. The secrets she carried are no longer hers alone. Scraps of truth have already flown beyond the palace, like birds released from hidden cages. In the reflection of a tall window, she sees herself not as a prisoner, but as a figure standing at the edge of a threshold, her silks falling like shed skin. She pauses before the final portrait, a queen whose story was erased, yet whose eyes still burn with quiet defiance, and for the first time she does not feel alone. Outside, the city's bells toll the hour, their sound rolling over rooftops into the night like a summons to a different future. She draws a slow breath, tasting the cool air laced with smoke and rain, and realizes that even if the system survives, something within it has cracked. A hairline fracture running through marble and memory. She turns from the portraits and walks down the corridor, her footsteps echoing softly, a living ghost carrying a secret history into tomorrow. The candle you saw at the very start, flickering in a room heavy with velvet and secrets, has burned down to a stub. Wax pools across the table like melted time, and the scent of smoke hangs in the air. The cradle draped in mourning black is gone. The locked box of letters now sits in an archive, its iron clasps rusting, its contents whispered about in footnotes and scandals rather than sermons. Yet the portraits still stare from their frames, eyes glinting with all they were forced to keep silent. The palace remains, but the story inside it is no longer embalmed. Through scraps of diaries, hidden passageways, and small acts of defiance, the Queen and her allies carve tiny cracks in the marble, and through those cracks, light spilled. The same light that now lets us see them as women, not just symbols. As you walk back out of this hall in your imagination, ask yourself, how many other stories behind crowns, titles and rituals are still locked away, waiting for someone to press their ear to the door? Do these echoes of submission and rebellion feel distant to you, or strangely familiar? If this journey into the hidden chambers of royalty moved you, subscribe for more untold histories, share it with someone who would feel its weight, and leave a comment about what secret from the past you most wish could be brought into the light. Together, we can turn whispers into voices and make sure these lives are remembered as more than just painted faces.